Welcome to the Property Trio. Today, it's the Property Duo. Dave and I are holding the fort while Mike's doing his charity ride. But Mike doesn't get off that lightly. He is going to have a couple of comments that we can add in post-production, and we'll also capture his gold nugget. But Dave and I have decided to tackle a really exciting listener question. And truth be told, Dave, Mike would have been sitting there twiddling his thumbs a little bit because we're not really talking a lot about economic affairs and quantity surveying. We're really getting into the nitty-gritty of lending, policy and loan structuring, and critical decisions that you need to make when you're property planning, of course. And there's a little bit of fun property stuff for me to chat about. So I think you and we can do this one justice today. What do you reckon?
Oh, I think we can, Kate. It's actually quite amazing that we've got to episode 200 and almost 50 without, well, with all three of the trio turning up for every single recording. So, yeah, looking forward to doing one with just the two of us today.
Yeah, where it all started. It's funny. I remember when Mike said he was going away and we're juggling diaries and thinking, oh, this is getting a bit awkward. You know, he has to do a lot of travel for his work, but with his charity ride thrown in the mix as well, we didn't want to hold back and miss putting an episode out. And of course, you and I masterminded the very beginning of all of this, so it was kind of nice falling back on a bit of property and finance and finding the right case study as well. So we've got a listener question.
It's a great case study today.
It's an awesome one. Yeah. So I want to thank our buddy. We're going to call him Jim today. So Jim has written in, and there are quite a few questions to this one. In fact, we couldn't have done any extra listener questions because he's packed so many great points and questions into his overview. I won't read it because we'll be here for half an hour if I read it. No, but we've got a couple of high income earners here. So Jim and his partner have combined, over $500,000 income, and it could be even up to potentially circa 700,000 income if they were both working full time. They've bought a property in Sydney as their owner occupier property. They've got a few misgivings about it. They were looking for quite a while and, had some ups and downs with the searches and ended up buying something that in hindsight, they're not sure if it was the right way to go. And we'll unpack that. They've also got a great investment property as well, but he's gone from full-time to 3 to 4 days a week, and his partner's decreased her work as well. They've got two properties, a $3 million principal place of residence and a $2 million investment property, both in Sydney. They're very young, they're in their early 30s, which I think is incredible what they've been able to achieve. We've got two kids, little ones, 3 and 1, and they've enjoyed being able to spend time with their children, obviously slowing down their work. They've got really good amount of money in their offset account, and they've got a little bit of money in shares as well. So the cash flow, however, is biting. With the interest rates where they're at, they're feeling like they might need to sell one, but they've got so many dilemmas here that they've wanted to run through with us. Let's chat about the first one, and I want to bounce this over to you, Dave. The very first property they bought, they searched for a long time and made the compromise that they thought they needed to make. In hindsight, the property is not the most desirable for the area. It's a 1970s red double brick concrete build. I believe this has contributed to us underperforming based on some other comparable period homes that we chose not to purchase or we were underbidders for. Dave, let's unpack that one first.
Yeah, look, I think it's a really great lived example of something that you and I both have talked about for a long time to our clients who are looking to purchase, and the risk of trying to purchase a bargain. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we can talk about how, look, if you're buying a bargain to get in, you'll be selling a bargain on the way out, and it's likely to underperform the capital growth along the way. And these guys have had a lived example of that. It can be very tempting. You're looking to purchase property. You've narrowed down on your location, the property type, and then you notice, a property that seems to be undervalued or selling for less relative to other properties in the area. And it can be tempting to go and purchase that property. And often I think we put on the rose-coloured glasses and we don't see some of the the faults of that property. We just see the price tag and the perceived savings that we're likely to get. And I feel like, these guys have probably got a really great lived example where, although they might have saved, and given the price point of the value of the property is now around $3 million, let's say they saved maybe, or thought they'd saved 100,000, 150, maybe even $200,000 on the purchase price. But now the capital growth has underperformed, and they're seeing other properties sell, for $400,000-$500,000 more, or maybe even a larger differential, and they're really seeing how that has actually cost them in the long run.
I think you're absolutely right. And technically we can explain what the outcome is when you do something like that. But the reasons why people often purchase a property that isn't as good as some of the others that they've been circling in on is a combination of fatigue. They're really tired, they just want a home.
Yeah.
And also that horrible feeling of FOMO. If I don't buy now, I'll get completely priced out. So let's just go for the lower hanging fruit, the one that's not getting as many buyers at the auction, the one that isn't quite as desirable because it will tick most of the boxes. And unfortunately, that's what we often see in a heated market. And dating back to the time that Jim bought this property, that was absolutely a heated market.
Yeah, 100%. So I think, look, it's a really good example for our listeners, because it can be tempting. You can be fatigued or just see the cheaper value on the property and be tempted to purchase something, but you can overlook the compromises, and particularly, that can have an impact if it's a home in terms of the quality of living and the happiness with the house that you're living in. But on the exit, as part of the exit strategy, it can cost you a lot more in money at the end of the day, and that's what these guys have found.
Yeah. I've got another question for you that relates to part of the strategy that they're considering. While their home has grown in value since buying it in 2019, they feel they could have bought a better growth option. Should they sell and rentvest, repurchase in another location, or should they hold it?
Yeah, look, we haven't read out all the detail of the client's question, the listener's question, because it was so long and so detailed, and you can see they really switched on people. And Jim has gone to a lot of effort to put a lot of detail into his questions for us, and there's a lot of sub questions underneath, and what I would call those questions are essentially the tactics, but I think they need to get their strategy right or their long-term property plan right. And so for me, it's pretty simple, that they need to nail the big rock in the jar, which is where they would like to live long-term to raise their kids. And what does that house look like? What is the location? And then they can clarify the cost. And until they nail this down and attach that price tag, everything else is guesswork. And to some extent, they're jumping at shadows with a lot of the, what I call the tactical questions that is asked. And Jim effectively told us this in a comment regarding his first questions, which was likely planning to sell our principal place of residence regardless and repurchase, in brackets, wife not keen on longer term rent vesting and deferring purchase of PPOR, principal place of residence. So look, Jim understands his wife's not going to be happy rent vesting for very long. And given she's made that clear to him, I suspect even 1 year would be the most that would be period of time that would be palatable for her to rent vest. So to me, it seems clear that I think they need to rip off the Band-Aid now and focus on this decision, and then a lot of the other decisions will roll from there.
I agree with you about rent vesting and a variation of appetite. We often find that when someone's talking about that as a strategy, to spin their wheels and get out of a situation that they're not happy with, as opposed to a very deliberate strategy that they've masterminded from day dot. Rent vesting can often have couples not necessarily being on the same page. For some, they see it as an opportunity to tick the boxes financially and move to the next step, while the others see that it's holding them back from having their own bricks and mortar, their own home. And it's whether it's the female or the male, or you've got same-sex couples, it's one or the other. My point is that rent vesting is not always something that people agree on. In fact, it's probably one of the investment strategies that I don't typically find that you've got complete agreement with.
Yeah.
And it's a more challenging strategy for a lot of reasons. Firstly, if you've got a situation like this where Jim's reasonably keen to try it out, his wife's reluctant, that's an issue. It probably won't work. But secondly, if you've got someone who embarks on rent vesting on their own, so it's usually a young single that's saying, well, I can't afford to buy where I'd like to buy, so I'll keep renting or staying with parents or whatever, traveling, and I'll have this property that will serve as a long-term investment. All is going well until they partner up. And then the partner wants their own home and they're forced to sell the Rentvest investment. And when you sell something, as we all know, sooner than you want to, you've got stamp duty, agents' fees, selling cost, marketing, and you've eroded your profit. So rent vesting is not something for the faint-hearted. You've really got to be dedicated to that strategy.
Yeah, there's very often that tension, isn't there, between one partner in the couple who really wants, particularly once there's children involved or on the way, they really have the desire to nest and have that, I guess, solidity and those roots in the ground in terms of the long-term home. And then the other partner often is really focused on long-term investing, setting themselves up for retirement, and is happy to forego buying a home to try and set that up. And working through that can be tricky, but it is really important that, I guess, ultimately each member of the couple understands each other's perspective and then are able to come to a decision that they're both happy with.
Yeah, I completely agree, Dave. Now, there was a mention here from Jim. For the school zone, we plan to rent a house in Beecroft from 2025 and rent out our principal place of residence. We had previously wanted to buy a principal place of residence in the lower North Shore area, but with our budget and serviceability, we'd likely only be able to get at best something further from the station, more basic and less renovated. Alternatively, our money would go further in a suburb like Beecroft. Dave, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so again, here Jim's telling us they already know where they want to live.
Yeah.
So I would be focusing on what does it look like, again, to buy the home here now, in terms of the location, house type, and cost. Ultimately, I mean, the reality is that the financial numbers need to stack up. So they need to understand what are these properties going to go for in these suburbs and what is achievable. And, this might take selling just the current family home and upgrading. It might take selling both properties to achieve this outcome. But potentially so be it. Knock it over now rather than waiting 5 or 10 years and feeling a sense of unease or uncertainty about their future for that lengthy period of time if this is their clear goal. And I think just another, I guess, risk of rent vesting at the moment is we're living through a period of time with the lowest vacancy rates on record. So, that's even exacerbated the challenge for rent vestors in today's day and age, hasn't it?
So true. And obviously escalating rents, in most of our cities, they're not abating. So the combination of your cash flow being more impacted because rents are higher and also that challenge of tight vacancy rates and a risk to your tenancy. All you need is for your landlord to issue a notice to vacate because they're selling the property or they're moving into it themselves or whatever, doing full
Yeah.
renovation. You're then, as a young family, that would be quite distressing. And to be honest, it reminds me of when Gab was 2 and we were issued a notice to vacate. No, actually, we were issued a notice of rent increase that was particularly high, and it challenged. This is back in 2008, time of the GFC. It challenged my rationale for staying rent vesting when I said to Ian we could get something pretty run down and do some work on it and move into our own 2-bedroom house and obviously stop the rent vesting journey and have that as our first principal place of residence. It's now an investment property, but I think about people with young families who are rent vesting, and that's a challenge because I had to pack a house with a toddler and I'd return to work. It was a really horrible time.
Yeah, and look, these are the things that will be going through Jim's wife's mind in particular, and how much they're going through Jim's mind, we can't be sure. But often the partner who's more focused on nesting is thinking quite deeply and aware of a lot of these things, whereas the one who's focused more on the investing sometimes isn't as aware of these types of considerations. So that's why it's really important to have those conversations, ideally with a property planner or a buyer's agent, and really understand what the, I guess, give and take is that's at play. I mean, they've mentioned the
Yep.
school zone as well, so obviously that's important to
Mm,
them. And then, if you do have to move, like that example you've just mentioned, Kate, it can be such disruption, and even to the point of potentially having to change schools, or even just the commute to the school can get
yep.
a lot longer. So there can be a lot of things that can really cause issues to, I guess, how the family functions.
I agree. And the fact that they're going through this real overhaul of strategy, they've got to get it right this time around. We're talking about big um, cost of selling numbers and big
Mm.
stamp duty numbers. These are significantly priced properties, particularly in our most expensive capital city. And to your point, Dave, if school zone and schools are on the radar, I sometimes say to clients, let's get an array of all of the schools that you're interested in and take it from there, because
Mm.
it doesn't mean that you have to be in the lower North Shore. If you can find another school zone that you're really happy with, and then you've got some other things that you're aligned with in that particular suburb, you might have found a more cost effective suburb, but these aren't the things to compromise on.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that, to segue into the next question from Jim, putting aside the emotional aspect of it, would it be more financially prudent to purchase an A grade property in a B grade suburb versus a B grade property in an A grade suburb? I've got so many thoughts on this. And what's interesting, Dave, is you and I aren't necessarily completely aligned on this, but we've both got some good theories to share with our listener.
Yeah, well, look, I think firstly, Jim probably shouldn't be putting the emotional aspect to the side, and I think
Yeah.
possibly this is the root cause of a lot of the headaches and challenges. They have, there's sort of like, if we read out his whole question, there's sort of like 10 different things or more they are thinking about, but I think overall it probably can be boiled down to this one key decision. And what is the plan for that long-term home? Let's get that clear. And should we be doing that now?
Mm,
And look, maybe the answer is no, but as long as they work through all that and get that clear, and they're happy to Rentvest for 10 years or however long, then that's okay. But I feel like, based on what he said and about how his wife in particular sees things, I think they need to get clear on that long-term home. But
yeah.
at the moment, what I see is a lot of spiraling, a lot of different questions being asked, and this causes decision fatigue and creates extra complexity to the
Yeah.
scenario that doesn't need to be there. So again, some good hearty conversations with each other and a third party like a property planner, buyer's agent, or even a strategic mortgage broker can be really helpful. And, ultimately they need to figure out, as a couple and a family, what's going to make them happy and satisfied, and answer that question, then start making decisions around this goal. If you do get the long-term home sorted, and the earlier you get it sorted, the sooner you then can, once it's affordable to you, you can start purely focusing on your investment strategy and not have that disruption of potentially having to move again down the track, or have this, I guess, dark cloud hanging over your head of, when are we going to buy that long-term home?
This leads me to my comment on how I help owner occupiers navigate this. And it's absolutely critical that you understand what your must-have criteria is. You can have 10 pages of criterion, but you've really got to work out what are non-negotiable and what are nice to have. The nice to haves, they give extra points to a property when they're nailing those nice to haves. But if you're looking at a property that is missing one of your fundamental must-haves, you have to put it on the no pile. And I feel for Jim, because I think his questions circle around his desire to get something that's a financial move, that's a really positive capital growth option for them, that will deliver long-term financially. But in his earlier question where he said putting emotion aside, you nailed it, Dave. When it's your home, you don't put emotion to one side. You make sure that everyone's happy because, as they say, happy wife, happy life. I think happy home, happy life, you're less likely to think about selling.
Yeah, and that's happy family. It's happy
It
kids.
is.
It's less disruption. Yeah. So, I mean, look, I think some of the questions include, do they need to sell both to purchase this long-term home? Can they sell just one? Can they wait until they both go back to working full-time, if in fact they both want to do that? I mean, are they happy in their current home or rent vesting for many years? It's part of the, sounds like possibly Jim's wife isn't, but let's explore those conversations.
Yeah.
I actually think all the lower level questions, as I've touched on, cannot be answered until they answer the big picture, high level questions. That they're at a stage of life where they can answer these questions, it seems, given they have 2 kids, they're married, and as long as, the big if is they see Sydney and particularly those sort of suburbs they've mentioned, as the probable location to raise their children. So, if they're 3 and 1 at the moment, if we're thinking through to them finishing school or finishing university, they need to have, like, ideally probably a 15 to 25 year time horizon. So look, there is strategy and then there is tactics, and a lot of what Andy's questions, as I've touched on,
Sorry,
have
Dave.
been.
Read that one out. Jamie, you'll need to cut that. It's Jim.
There's your strategy or your property plan, and then there are the tactics that come underneath it. But until they've I guess solidified the big picture plan and strategy, there's no point sort of getting lost in the weeds of the tactics, if you like, because a lot of that's really the white noise until that property plan is clear.
So back to Jim's original question. Should they target an A-grade property in a B-grade suburb or vice versa?
Look, I mean, I'll let you unpack that, Kate. I think that's certainly something to consider when it comes to an investment strategy.
Yeah.
But if the next decision's the long-term home, then really that's more of an emotional decision with an eye on capital growth, sure. Why don't you unpack your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've got a little bit of a different approach, but obviously I've said earlier, you shouldn't compromise on happiness. That's the key thing. And a lot of people find that if they can't afford what they want, they'll consider rent vesting. And that's sometimes it works, but it's not necessarily a sound reason to rent vest because things can change. Let's talk about what Jim is actually asking in layman's terms, and what are some good examples. So when we talk about an A grade and a B grade, I don't want B grade to sound bad. D grade for me is bad. A grade's amazing. B grade's great. C grade is considerable for certain situations, and D grade is a void. So if I use an example of A and B grade, it might be when you hear journalists asking about a bridesmaid suburb. And we all know how you get that fantastic wave when you've got a suburb that's really popular and it's flying, everybody wants into it. And then maybe the suburb next door or the next train station along is relatively cheaper and it's offering a lot of the elements that the A grade suburb is offering. I call that a B grade suburb, and it's not unusual for me to have a client brief when they end up buying in the next suburb. And that's not a bad thing, because if they're trying really hard to retrofit their purchase into the A grade suburb, they will end up potentially getting a D grade home. And that's the issue. I've had clients that have been so desperate to get into a certain postcode, they've only been restricted to looking at stuff on main roads or in really awkward locations. And that's compromising. When you've got a property that has lost mainstream appeal or it's got minimal mainstream appeal, in a hot market, you'll easily find a buyer for it. But in a tough market, it will be the property that languishes and probably has heavier discounting than most. So I'm really cautious about buying a B grade house in an A grade suburb, as Jim has said. I'm all for looking at the B grade suburb and working out how you can get a beautiful house in a great street. And, I had a situation only last week with fantastic clients that would have loved to have been in Williamstown or Newport. They bought in Spotswood. I absolutely love Spotty, but the house that they got was within their budget and had every single bell and whistle that they wanted. So I do think that that's a strategy worth tackling for Jim and his wife, as long as the suburbs that they're circling are genuinely B grade and not D grade, and they tick all of the important must-haves.
Yeah, it's a really common conundrum, isn't it, when people are
Yeah.
looking to buy that long-term home and they're torn because often we try to bite off more than we can chew. And, you
Everybody
know,
wants more than they can afford. It's human
exactly,
nature.
100%. Yeah. And you see it all the time with people, they come to us, particularly for the strategic mortgage broking service, and they have a budget at a certain point to get a pre-approval at, and then they always want to increase it and stretch it. So it's just part of probably the human psyche, isn't it? And so it really is. The more you can clarify this before you begin the process of, okay, we really want this type of house, we want this suburb, but the two pushes us out of our budget. Are we really keen? Like we want this type of house, so we're going to move out one suburb further, or we are willing to compromise on the land size and or the dwelling, or renovate over time and get into this suburb. Figuring that out beforehand is so important, because it can mean you end up dropping hundreds of thousands of dollars because you do end up selling again. And potentially, this first home of theirs is an example of that. We don't know that for sure, but potentially it is.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, the investment property is also biting. We've got increased interest rates. However, this particular investment property was bought reasonably strategically. There are metro works that are nearing completion that this property will be positively impacted by. So here's the conundrum: do they hold for the short term?
Look, again, I'm being boring here, but it comes down to that long-term plan and the plan for the home for me. Sure, if they can Rentvest for many years, and the probably, they then can hold this investment property if it makes sense to, and they don't need that stability of the long-term home and getting that big rock in the jar, then
Yeah.
hold on to it. But I think that is really the question they need to ask, and the Metro Works element is secondary.
I agree with you, Dave. I'm always pained when I can see that, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, or this shining, shimmering, whatever it is, a mirage or an end date there that could be a payday. Ultimately, if they're feeling the pinch and they've been prompted to write into us, clearly it's a little bit uncomfortable.
Mm.
They can work out how long they can bear the discomfort if it's mild discomfort. And that might be a case of holding, particularly if they can see the day where they'll have higher incomes and higher buffers. But if this is starting to trigger decisions about divesting, whether it's the IP or their principal place of residence, I'm really uncomfortable with them just holding on. I think, to your point, they need to take stock of the situation that they've got and have a really sound and solid strategy moving forward. I'm definitely someone who's a fan of having an investment property because I love getting the owner occupier property right. You've taught me a lot about that, Dave. I was opposite to that in my early days. But I also think it would be a shame to put absolutely everything into the PPOR and not have other investments by the time they hit retirement. So the critical thing for them
Yeah.
here is really talk about what they both want. What do they want in the home, and what do they want in retirement, and how do they want their wealth journey to look? Rather than saying, where should we invest? They should be saying, why are we investing? What do we want? How much do we want? When do we want it?
Yeah.
And that will really determine the next steps. Because if having an abundance of wealth or a certain amount of wealth upon retirement is a stronger goal than the perfect home, then they can pare it back and both settle on exactly what sort of price tag they want to spend on the home and where they will be happy, knowing also that they've built something for the future. It's a very, very personal decision. And as I said
Yeah.
earlier, they've got other investments and they've got cash on hand. This couple are working hard and they've got really good incomes. So they do have options. I'm concerned that they're both maybe hoping for a magical silver bullet, or they're on different pages. There's something here for me that's not quite gelling, but I think with their willingness to sit down and tackle a strategy together and look broader than just what are we buying, where are we buying, I think they can nail this.
Yeah, look, I think they definitely can nail it. I mean, they're clearly both switched on young people who are very successful, given their age, and are going to be on a really positive trajectory. So I have no doubt that they can ultimately have their cake and eat it too, which
Mm,
is, get the right long-term home in the right location, as well as build a solid investment nest egg for retirement. And without sound of beating my own drum, a property planner being able to model this out in the software and compare and contrast a number of different trajectories and pathways, and price points. Do we pay a bit less for the home, buy that now, sell one, sell two, and then when do we buy our next investment property? And how many investment properties can we buy through to retirement? And being able to actually look at this play out between their current age of early 30s through to 65 in actual software using real numbers based off their current financial position and future projections and assumptions, I think they can make really informed decisions.
yeah.
And as I said, I do think, they'll be able to have their cake and eat it too.
And we'll talk later on in this ep, although we're coming towards the end of it. I've got a few thoughts on income levels at the moment, because clearly they've got really strong capacity to earn even more, and it does come down to some choices to make.
Yeah.
But just addressing the key issue now, it's cash flow. That's
Yeah.
what's prompted this. It's not anything else. They can look at the property that they're in and say, oh, we could have bought something prettier or better. But the reality is they've got a good investment property and they've got a home that's working for them, and cash flow is biting now that interest rates have moved up. So what are some of the considerations here to help them ride out their current challenges, Dave?
Yeah, look, Jim, again, he's been really honest with his own assessment of their situation, and he's said, look, they've got paying principal and interest on both loans, and he knows they shouldn't have been. So they made a short term decision on the investment loan when they took it out, maybe to get a lower interest rate. I'm not quite sure why. Maybe they were stretching themselves for a borrowing capacity perspective, and therefore couldn't put it on interest only, because that does impact your borrowing capacity. So he understands that's costing them cash flow. So, they should be paying interest only on the investment loan, to optimize their tax deductions, reduce their or improve their cash flow. And then also they'll have more cash. The principal that's going towards the investment property can be going towards reducing the interest payable on the home. So, that's one thing they could be doing. This will also make it more viable to be able to keep the investment property when they upgrade the home, because they'll actually have more tax deductions on that property, which will make it more viable to keep, and they'll have more money, either sitting in offset or having reduced, paid down the loan on the existing home. So that's definitely one thing they could do. I think
Yeah,
another factor is that they say they've got $450,000 in offset. I mean,
yeah,
that's a significant buffer that should allow them to ride through this time with reduced income, if that's something they want to prioritize, which is, working 4 days a week for Jim and 3 days for his wife at the moment, and being able to spend a bit of extra time with your kids. So, that really is um, a risk profile question or a mindset question. Are you, willing to tread water for a period of time, or not improve your financial position as rapidly as you used to prior to kids? Now, that is very normal as well. Most people are obviously one partner scales back work a fair bit after you have children, and so you have a period of time where you're generally not going forward financially as well. You're not saving as much. You might even tread water or go backwards. It's not talked a lot about. It's not something we're necessarily educated on prior to having kids. It's something we talk with our clients a lot about. when they're at that stage of life. But you can see everyone struggles with that transition, and that's part of what's going on for them now. So you sort of need to reconcile that and go, are we happy or comfortable to, I guess, have that trade-off where we spend more time with our children during those years, but we don't go forward as much financially. But again, look, they've got $5 million in the property market, so probably most of where their wealth is growing is through capital growth. So, that sometimes you don't have to be as caught up on how much you're saving during that sort of period of time. So, there's some of the things that they should be thinking about around a cash flow and a buffer perspective.
You've made a really great point, Dave. I often say to people, when you're having children and you're taking parental leave or you're slowing down your work or however you're managing it, you've got to be prepared to pay for that time. And it's a horrible thought, and people don't like seeing their bank balance go backwards or their loan balance growing, or it's a difficult thing to witness. But like anything that you're buying, you need to provision for it, whether it's upgrading your home, buying a car, going on holiday, doing an extension, popping away school fees in the offset account. We've seen so many different situations where people provision, and I think we have to think about it that way when we are taking parental leave, because it's an investment personally for you to be spending that time with your children if that's what you want to do, and you can't expect that it won't impact your wealth goals, because of course it will. Kids are expensive.
They sure are. Ultimately, these decisions boil down to how do we want to strategically design our life to create our ideal lifestyle? What does that look like? And then we make our financial and property decisions to suit that.
Yeah, absolutely, because you just get one shot at this. So back to Jim and his wife. If they do sell the investment property, should they buy several smaller priced, higher rental yielding options? I sort of love and hate this question. I get it a lot, and I can see that he's really thinking hard about how to ease the cash flow here. But I'm struggling with this strategy because it's a pivot and it's not necessarily in line with the original intent. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, look, I think, again, they've got to get the big picture clear. Whatever that looks like, then, you build in terms of the home. I think you build, if you do want to have a long-term home, then I think you build your investment strategy around that. And until that number, is known in terms of what's going to be put into the cost of the long-term home, it's hard to really map it out. In terms of a general, my general philosophy, and, you've noted this as well, I think, we've talked about it in podcasts, I prefer to get as much into the market as you can each time you buy an investment property. So you have to make fewer decisions. If you can, you just pick a dollar figure. But let's say, it's owning $2 million or $5 million worth of property, investment properties. If you can do that, across 2 or 3 or 4 properties rather than 5, 6, 7 or 8, generally I'd prefer, to own less properties for the greater value.
It's an interesting consideration, and we've had so many great debates about this. And it comes down to your investment and retirement strategy. Clearly, if you're reliant on having softer cash flows and you're wanting to amass properties and have a rental income in retirement, you'll go down the smaller priced, higher yielding property route. And there's some false thoughts around that. You can find properties that are high yielding but actually have a lot of costs associated with them, so they're pointless investments. You don't want to get something that's giving you lots of rent but costing you a lot to hold it. But in terms of Jim's strategy, do they want unencumbered high yielding properties to deliver a rental income into their retirement, or are they wanting to amass capital growth? Because capital growth seems to be the pattern in this listener question overview. So I'd be challenging Jim on why he'd want to look at smaller priced options unless his strategy has pivoted and in retirement he wants to hold on to these assets and just enjoy the rent. Because if he was to purchase some capital growth assets, they don't necessarily need to be all paid down, but when he does sell them into retirement, he'll have a really significant gain. he'll pay the CGT and he'll be able to reinvest it. So it's all about strategy. And let's talk about the cost of not being clear on your retirement strategy as well. You'll end up having to trigger some sales because you'll have mistaken purchases. You'll have wasted stamp duty, wasted selling fees, capital gains tax, and giving up goals and expenditure on the personal and family things that really matter. And obviously, you'll restrict the size of your retirement nest egg and ultimately your retirement income because you've been divesting and losing some of these profits that you could have had on hand.
Yeah, look, I agree with all that, Kate. That sums it up really well.
Now we're getting towards the end of our listener question. We've still got a couple of his questions to go. Will selling the principal place of residence and rent vesting and then selling the investment property help them avoid CGT? Dave?
So I think it reads as if Jim thinks that if they sell their home, then the investment property automatically becomes the primary place of residence and would avoid CGT, but that isn't the case. So they would not have any CGT discount on the investment property unless they've lived in it. And so it doesn't read as though they've lived in it initially. So they could only get some of that principal place of residence exemption if they then moved into it after selling the home, which again, he hasn't referenced. So I don't think it's on the radar to do that. But if they do move into it, then it would have some of the principal place of residence exemption, but it would be proportional relative to how long it was an investment property versus how long they'd lived in it. So obviously they would need to live in it for a number of years to even have lived in it for a 50% amount of the amount of time they've owned the property, given it's been an investment property, I think, for about 3 or 4 years already.
Yeah. And people stumble over this all the time. Now, we don't give tax advice. And if you're thinking of tackling CGT or minimising it or avoiding it, you absolutely need to talk to a qualified professional to get that advice. But I'm with you, Dave. A lot of people misunderstand CGT around conversion of an IP into a PPOR.
Yeah. And look, you and I both know often when people are trying to sort of be too smart by half or, come up with different ideas or strategies to make things work better for them. Often it just makes things more complex and messy and, they lose out in the long run anyway.
Mm. Yeah, hard to trick the ATO, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Should returning to work full-time be contemplated short-term?
So, look, I think if they do decide that the next decision is a long-term home, certainly from a serviceability perspective, going back to work full-time, particularly Jim, whose income is close to 3 times as much as his wife's, it'll make
Even though hers is exceptionally high. I mean, these are high income earners.
High income earners. So full-time income of Jim's is 500 and for his wife's 180. So both of them, it's going to improve their serviceability, which could make a significant difference in terms of the home that they're able to buy. So that definitely could be a consideration, at least during the period that they're getting approval and searching for and then purchasing their home, and then see where things land. That might just allow them to get a better home, but it also might allow them to borrow more so they have a larger buffer up their sleeve, more cash in redraw or more cash in offset. So it just could provide that extra flexibility. But look, I also think, one of Sarah and I, my wife and I both work 5 days a week. Okay. But, I'm just in the last couple of years, I've started doing drop off and pick up 6 or 7 days times of the week. So out of the 10 pick up and drop offs, and I'm taking the kids to and from sport a fair bit and those sorts of things. I still work full time, but I only have meetings most days of the week between, say, 9:30 and 3. Okay. But then do I work at night most days of the week? Yes. Do I occasionally work on the weekend? Yes. But I have that complete flexibility. I think, they both should talk to their employers about that type of flexibility. At the start of each term, we map out, okay, what are all the kids' commitments across the 3 kids? And it's a lot, I can tell you, each term. And then we figure out, okay, well, what do our weeks look like? What do our weekends look like? And work around that. I think that's what I would also suggest that Jim considers doing, because, he might find that he's able to work 5 days a week, but it's on his terms and it's the hours that suit him. And so he actually has as much free time as that 4 day a week, without the pay hit. So I think that's something they could look at as well.
Yeah, definitely worth exploring. It's a good call out. Some jobs let you do it and some don't. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I've had a client Zoom meeting sitting in the car in a netball court. It is a juggle as long as you've got the right balance. I think a return to work should be considered. It should be discussed if their wealth retirement goals are at risk of being unmet. So I'm all for enjoying children while they're young, but your big days in your career are really formative, and for Jim, potentially those formative days are now. Where he's very young, and his wife as well. They're both earning really solid incomes at a very young age. Where could that take them? And the question is, how does part-time work impact that trajectory going forward? And only they have those answers. I don't want to sound like an old dinosaur, because I know that work is a lot more flexible these days. I've got working parents who work for me, and I love that we can make it work. But I think this conversation is one that they can only have between themselves, but it's an important one. And your solutions and suggestions, Dave, are options.
Yeah, and I think it's horses for courses, and what might be right for them. Like, I'm talking about what they could think about right now, given it seems as though they prefer 4 days and 3 days. But, in 3 years or 5 years, or when both the kids are at primary school, it might be, let's go 5 days a week per normal and really, grow our wealth for a number of years. So I think this is the type of thing that, you should continue to reevaluate along the way.
Yes. Now we've got one last question, and it's a big, hard-hitting question, but we are at 48 minutes in, and we're not going to be able to unpack it in detail, but we've got a really good insight. Dave, does the trio think that Jim and his wife can achieve $140,000 per annum in passive income by retirement?
Look, I think the short answer is yes. I mean, they've got so much of their life ahead of them. So I think they'd get significant value out of a property plan. I mean, my high level takeout from Jim's really detailed, questions is get clear on their long term home. Number one, what will it cost? Where is it located? What it looks like. Number two, work out if or how they could purchase it now. 3, potentially consider rent vesting in that location, while they're constantly searching the market for any property that comes up that they would be happy to buy. And have that plan to divest one or both the properties, as depending on how the numbers roll out. And if they need to sell both, you probably should be selling one initially and then be ready to go on the other one. So you can move as soon as you find the right property. So then I think, they can make decisions that suit them, cutting back their hours, whether it be today, whether it be down the track, whether it be go back to work full time when they hit primary school. Those are the things for them to continue to reevaluate over their lifetime, ideally in conjunction with their property plan. They might need to come up with tactics like going back full time to maximize their borrowing capacity and purchase price now, or one of them, which could make a significant difference. And I think once they've got the big rock in the jar and they're settled and they've got enough equity and buffer in place and surplus cash flow, then, let them start developing that investment strategy. we haven't shared they do invest in shares as well, which they might need to sell down to get into that home as well. But, once they get that big rock in the jar, then it's a really simple strategy from then. It's all about investing.
Yeah. Nicely said. We've hit 50 minutes and I still want a gold nugget for each of us. We're going to get Mike to share his gold nugget as well from afar. Jim, thank you very much for sending in such an honest and an open set of questions. We've really enjoyed unpacking it. We hope that you've enjoyed some of our suggestions as well. And by the way, I love your email. I'm not going to say it on air, but I'm intrigued. Dave, what's your gold nugget?
Now it's time for us to go mining for our gold nugget property tip of the day.
My gold nugget is the importance of, if you do plan to purchase a family home and you do see yourselves living in the same family home and or an area where you can raise your kids over a long period of time, then don't put off deciding what that looks like. Once you know that's something that you'd like for your family, start planning for it and get clear on it as soon as you can, and then purchase that property as soon as you can, because that then paves the way to then be able to focus purely on investing sooner rather than later, with less other decisions that can create complexity or delay or cause selling and cost you a whole heap of money that wouldn't needed to have happened otherwise.
Yeah, well said. By the man who has prioritised a family home and has a cricket pitch in the backyard and a half basketball court in the front. Yeah, you've definitely got license to share your wisdom there, Dave. My gold nugget is, I wish everyone, when they're starting out, could afford a property plan. I really do. Because if you can get all of that right at the start, it can really help you establish things from the ground up. But what I will say is, when you're a high income earner and you're making high caliber property purchase deals and you've got millions of dollars at stake in 2 properties, a property plan is absolutely vital, because you don't want to be reversing those decisions. It hurts anyone to reverse a property purchase decision, but when you're talking about this kind of stamp duty and CGT and agent selling fees, it's really amplified. So my best advice to anyone who's thinking about jumping into the property market and is contemplating home versus investments, get a plan if you can.
Thanks, Kate. Your check's in the mail.
On that note, we look forward to seeing you all next week.
See you next week.
See ya.